We're looking in the next few weeks at one short book in the Old Testament, and it's the book of Ruth. And does anybody here know the story of Ruth? Any of you? No, a few of you will know the story of Ruth. It's a fabulous story, isn't it? You know, when you know it, it's one of the greatest love stories that there is. I'm really surprised nobody's made a film out of it. It's such a good story. But I thought, just to get it in our minds, there's a little video for us to watch, and we're just dealing this morning with the first chapter. There's 4 chapters in Ruth as the story goes through. We're just doing one this morning, so you're just seeing a little bit of the video this morning. Okay?
In the town of Bethlehem, there was a couple called Elimelech and Naomi. They had 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. There was a terrible famine in the land, so they left home to look for food in another place. They moved from Bethlehem to live for a while in the country of Moab. And while they were in Moab, Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. When Naomi heard in Moab that the famine in Bethlehem was over, she packed up and prepared to return home from there. She said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home." They said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "No, you need to get married again." So Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye and went back home. But Ruth clung to Naomi and said, "Don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried." So Naomi and Ruth came back from Moab to Bethlehem. When they arrived, the whole town was shocked because Naomi had aged so much. Don't call me Naomi," she told them. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter." Ruth went to the fields to pick up leftover grain. That was the only way she could get food.
Okay, got the story in your mind now? It's quite an amazing story. It starts off a bit gloomy, doesn't it? With the bereavement of Naomi and of her husband, and then of her 2 sons. But we see in this story a wonderful story of human love and what it can do and how it can work out. In the book of Ruth, we have nothing directly about God at all. There's no sort of great teachings, there's no explicit words, but God's love and handiwork is seen in the way that these women choose to love. And as the story goes on, there are other people who choose to as well. It's a wonderful human story. It shows our potential as humans. It shows what we're capable of being. A lot of the Old Testament talks about law and purity and what's clean and what's not clean and all those sorts of things. But this just shows love, just talks about how humans can act out the very nature of God in their own lives. Think for a moment, if you will, on the decisions of those 3 women. What are they going to do? It's a society where they're very dependent on their men. It's very difficult for women to survive on their own. And what do? They make choices for each other, not for themselves. Naomi says to the girls, Her loving choice for them is go back to your own people, your own families. Stay in your own country. You can have a life again. You can find another husband. And they say to her, no, we're not going to do that. They choose for Naomi, don't they? It goes one way and then the other. And Naomi says, no, you go back. And they say, no, we're going to go with you. And Ruth in particular follows that through, doesn't she? And there's those lovely words where she says, I will go, where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Easy words to say, but my goodness, did it take determination to live out like that? It's a real big choice, isn't it, folks? Really big choice to do that sort of thing. It's a noble way of living, but as I said, you've got to be on it. You've got to want to do it. There's a word that's used in the original, in the Old Testament, and it's a word that's called hesed. And I mention it because there isn't a really good translation for it. And the word hesed means something like loyalty, steadfastness, mercy. I mean, what incredible qualities. You put those three things together and you've got one beautiful human life, haven't you? Loyalty, steadfastness, and mercy. You think about the choices those women made for each other, and they didn't lay it on each other. They didn't lay a guilt trip on each other. You've got to do what I think or anything. It was just pure loving choices that you can do this. You're free. I love you. Go and be what you have to be. And they make their choices in the way that they do. I suppose the other thing that we see in this story about Ruth, and next week John will be speaking, and he's going to talk about the second chapter of John, and that's about the nature of love in it, so I don't want to steal his thunder. But the other thing that's really strong in the book of Ruth, and we start to see it working here, is what it's like, or how it can be, to be a stranger or an alien amongst other people. In the very, very early stories of how the Jewish people came together, there was they used to live amongst other people, and other people lived amongst them. And the word that was used was that of a friendly alien. Quite a nice term, isn't it? A friendly alien. Made me think of E.T., you know? Perhaps they didn't look quite as different, but, you know, just a friendly alien. I saw a clip the other day of Kate Winslet in a new film of Avatar that's coming out. My, that's a friendly and different-looking alien, if you want to see that one. So it still fascinates us as humans, the idea of a friendly other, somebody who's different to us. I mean, on Friday, we had such a lovely time at the table at coffee morning that I was sat at, because a different couple came down, and they go to, some of you will remember Phil, who was here, and he's down in Armley, and they go there, but they've moved into Calverley, and Phil had said to them, come to the coffee morning, you'll meet local people. So we had a good chat, and they'd lived in Tunisia. And I was like all agog, because we travelled a bit in Tunisia. Oh, come on, tell us how it was when the President Ben Ali, you know, with the spring, the Arab Spring, as they called it, and that. And I was so fascinated, because they had other experience than I'd had, you know, and we were all as a table talking about it. And it was exciting, and otherness can be really exciting, can't it? You know, we don't have to be fearful of it. It's something joyous and wonderful. I mean, that song, you and you and you and you, and you're Chatty and I'm Gabby, and, you know, all the difference that we are, we're all precious. Of course, if we go right from the early days of how the Jewish nation was developing up to the time of Christ, which is where we pin our faith on the extra revelation that came in Jesus, we see how Jesus tells us to treat the other, the stranger amongst us. And it was in the gospel reading. And some of you that have come to church for a long time, or when you were young, will remember those words. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And love your neighbour as yourself. Love your neighbour as yourself. Here, ages before, in this story of the book of Ruth, we see how that works out for them, loving the other as yourself. There's more to come, more exciting stuff than you've had today. But it is a thought, isn't it? How otherness works out in human society, right up to today. It's an issue and a thought, isn't it? If you go back again and you think about how the early Jewish faith and nationhood was forming, there was a time when they saw other people, other nations, other developing peoples as, yeah, God's made them, but they're only important if he uses them to teach us something. It's a bit of a self-centered way of looking, isn't it? And in the book of Jonah, you remember Jonah and the whale, we'd learnt the stories. There's a point where in the book of Jonah, the Ninevites and other people are seen merely as cattle. They're just like the cattle. And God will use them, or might use them, to teach the Israelites something. But that's their value, that God uses them. That's their view of other nations. They only had worth in relation to what they meant to the developing sense of the Israelite nationhood. Now, I'm going to ask you to jump a lot later, and the people of God have been developing, but there comes a time where they're taken away in exile to Babylon. And you know, we get that lovely Boney M song from that, those of you that are old enough to remember or still like the Boney M song, about when they were in Babylon, laid down their harps by the water and cried, and they remembered Zion, another name for Jerusalem, another name for their capital. And it's come to the point where they've been many, many, many years in exile, and they're allowed to come back to their own country. But you have something different that's happened. The people that stayed behind in Jerusalem weren't taken into exile, have intermarried and formed kind of a multi-faith, multicultural community. And the people that have been in exile now come back with a really strong sense of their own identity. They really believe they are the people of God. They've got a special purpose, and they've to be pure, and they're to keep themselves separate. And so you have a huge clash as they come back over the way forward. Now, two of the leaders of the people when they came back to Jerusalem, Ezra and Nehemiah, they felt that the way forward was a kind of social cleansing, really, that they should, break their relationships with other people from other countries or other backgrounds or other faiths, and they should become pure. And it's quite strong teaching, and it in our Bible, there are lots of things that are quite difficult. And it's very important we read them in context of the time and what was going on, because some of those verses about that event were very words that Hitler used to justify the Holocaust. That's really quite concerning, isn't it? that happened. But it did. And some people believe that this book of Ruth was written to counter that. And counter it does, whether it was written for it or not. It does counter it. It gives us a total picture of another way of living as beautiful human beings as God has called us to be in this multi-faith, multicultural, pluralistic community that they then found themselves in. What was their role to be? Do you recognise many similarities to today? There's lots of things, aren't there, that are really similar in that story. We live in a very pluralistic, multi-faith, multicultural society. There are all sorts of thoughts out there we can go and graze on, we can be enlarged by, we can grow through. There are all sorts of different ways to base our policies on. It's a great melting pot of humanity and of human ideas and beliefs. But there are other things as well, though, aren't there, that are similar. We as Brits have a strong sense of ourselves, don't we? Often there's talk about we're Brits, we're not Europeans, and we're not this and we're not that. We're us. We have our history. And at times, we don't always have a lot of respect for other countries for what they are. Sometimes it seems, and certainly in our past, we viewed other countries for what they could do for us, haven't we? You know, certainly in our colonial past, but it goes on a bit as well, I think. And to this very day, we have others arriving on our shores, treated as animals, corralled, locked up, dispatched around the world, not where they choose to be at all. So we have those hard things going on in what, strangely enough, is our pluralistic, multi-faith community. So as Christians, guys, what's our role? What are we asked to do? One of my favourite authors, and it'll be on the Going Deeper sheet if you want to look it up, talks about the struggle that cities and churches had in Babylon, and he relates it to today as well. And he suggests 3 options about what the church should be. 1, we could be a stabilising role in society. 2, his suggestion, what we could be, is we could offer or promote a very strong personal religion. You know, it's about you getting saved and it's about your heaven and blow anybody else. Or we could learn how to be, as a church and individuals, to be salt, leaven and light. Salt, yeast and life, if you like. That which flavours, which enables to grow, which enlightens, which is beautiful and makes things better. And that teaching about salt, leaven and light comes again from Jesus. So we've come right from way back in the Old Testament to what Jesus is saying about how we as Christians should be living. In this book of Ruth, there's so much that is close to the coming teachings of Jesus about how to live, how to be, how to think about each other, and how we ask, what is our role in society? So we could do loads of things. I just, in conclusion, ask you to think about some of the things that we as a church have done in this last year. One of the things that I loved happening was the beer festival. I mean, what a joy, wasn't it? Very strange experience for an old hand like me to come into church on a Sunday morning for communion with it smelling of beer. It was quite a funny experience, and I absolutely thanked God for the joy of that that it was a new experience that I'd had, and that so much love had been shared in the community in that. We had wreath making, and people around who wanted to come came and made wreaths and celebrated, getting ready for Christmas. And I'll add our Tuesday afternoon group, the tag group, which people can come to whether they come to church or not. And it's about having joy and a little bit of focus together and just loving each other, really. And you look at those things that we're starting to do as a church, they're very much salt, light, leaven in society, aren't they? So just maybe we're beginning to get, we are continuing to get some things right. It's good to do it as a church, but that same call comes to us in the way we live our Christian lives. Do we have to always be going around on the offensive as Christians, saying, well, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, you should think this, you should think that? Well, that's not what Jesus says, and it's not what this book of Ruth shows us. The book of Ruth shows us that it's about how we love, loyalty, kindness, mercy on one another, all living out the very nature of God. You're going to have fun in the next 3 weeks as you find out a bit more about Ruth. You could go home and read it. If you look in the index, you'll find where it is in your Bible, tucked away in the earliest part of the Old Testament. But have a go at it, you'll love it, and you'll enjoy the next 3 weeks even more, I'm sure. But do go on into this week, love, light, joy and mercy to the people around us. Amen.